Welcome, everyone. This is the September 20th, 2024 joint meeting of several committees that are part of the Seneca County IDA. These are the IDA's Audit Committee. It's the County EDC and the County Funding Corp Audit Committees. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and Sarah, let you guide us through these.
Okay. Do you want me to just go through okay.
Please do.
So we're gonna start with the IDA Audit Committee. First item of business is approval of the meeting minutes for that committee from March 7th. So just as a refresher to everybody, voting members of the committee are Ben, Bruce, and Steve for this one. Does anybody have any corrections or comments in regards to the audit committee minutes?
None?
No.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next item of business. Review and recommend approval of the engagement letter. So this will, pending approval, go to the full IDA board. Once again, the engagement letter for the audit for the 2024 year is from Mengel, Metzger and Barr. They are the auditors that have worked with us since well before I came to the IDA. We do have a different lead. We've had a different lead over the past couple of years, Mike DeBotts. It would still be him for this coming audit cycle. So the audit fees as proposed are a couple pages in. It's like the second to last page. They're proposing the regular audit for the IDA at $12,875 for the year, and then the single audit, which is for the revolving loan fund, at $2,350 for a total cost of $15,225. Are there any questions?
No?
No.
Motion to recommend approval to the IDA board.
So moved.
Yeah, I'll second.
And we don't need a roll call vote, so all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The next item of business is review of the long-term IDA forecast. So this, we have two different forecasts, and we did have a discussion this morning. We are gonna be updating the way that we show these a little bit. Let's start with the worst case. We'll go from bad to less bad. So this is known revenues only against budgeted expenses. And by known revenues, it means something that we're essentially contracted for. You will see the first column here is our 2024 forecast. So this is based on what we think our actual performance will be. It is not necessarily a direct translation of what was approved in our 2024 budget. So we are gonna be having less expenses in 2024 than what we had budgeted for. That's not uncommon, you know, we're able to cut costs on some things. Agency fees are less forecasted than what we had initially anticipated. We're all aware of this. It was largely because of the Trilina project we had showed for the past few years in our budget. That obviously still hasn't closed yet. So as of the end of 2024, we would project under this scenario to have $1.828 million in cash on hand. That's operating cash. That's not our revolving loan fund or any of our things. This is basically unrestricted cash to operate the IDA. Based on what we're proposing in the 2024 budget, there would be, you know, a significant decrease again because this is worst case and only known revenues. Operating cash available would go down by over $600,000 to $1.188 million, and then you see that number decreasing over time. By 2027, we're negative, which is obviously something to keep an eye on. We've got essentially 2 years of runway under this scenario. If there are no changes to this, which
And the other.
obviously there will be, or ideally there will be.
This is a cash flow forecast, and the other operating expenditures, do these include what might otherwise be considered capital?
Yes, so because this is cash flow, it does include the estimated expenditure for the office renovation. So this is showing not the impact on the balance sheet, not the impact on the P&L. There's no depreciation in this. It is cash outlays and what's that gonna do to our operating cash accounts.
In the out years, 26, 27, and to 30, we're seeing pretty significant other operating expenses. Are those, do we know anything about what those are? The 190, the 195, the 201, and all that?
So they do tie to our budget, professional fees, conferences, and marketing. Are we in this number, Kelly?
Just carrying forward some amount of capital that's a little ambitious. Those numbers.
So the other operating expenses includes everything besides professional fees, conferences, and marketing. So everything in the other operating, if you look at the budget, it would include
So it'd
everything
be
else.
office expenses, administrative and technical, insurance,
Mhm.
miscellaneous repairs.
And the overhead of this building.
But that's not 100, or is that 190,000 in 2026?
Yes, and then we do an increase.
We usually estimate 3%
Yeah.
increases.
And that's added in this number.
Yes.
That is in the number. So you'll notice that the budget between 2025 and 26, there's a decrease in the forecast for other operating expenditures. That's because the cash outlay for the capital renovation is
Is not
removed.
included. Yeah.
The 50,000 in site development is removed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it does not include those numbers.
Could we just get, again, it's not urgent, but it would be nice to see.
We could do a more itemized version of this if that's what you would like.
Yeah,
Okay. So we will, before the full IDA board meeting, do updated forecasts based on some of the discussions we've had. And
For
we will
both schedules?
for both schedules. The worst case will only change in the sense that we'll do the more itemized version. Otherwise, the format of it will be similar.
Mhm.
The other forecast we're gonna go over, we've always set a certain total income as our assumption. That one we're actually gonna change based on the way that we're now starting to forecast future agency fees. So there will be more fluctuation in that.
With that schedule.
Yes, but we will have both updated by the time we next meet.
just to note, in this sheet, the 2023 total operating expenses, not the other, was 479. The other, I think that's the highest and best use study there, the 113.
Mhm.
If we go from 479 to,
680.
yeah, like, something's gotta be,
We'll give you a greater level of detail so you can see exactly where those estimates are happening.
Identifiable.
yeah. that
And
would-
it's possible that we can alter some of those. So we'll get that
Mhm.
updated for the next time. Are there any other questions in regards to the worst case forecast? If not, we will look at the other one, which is the forecasting 400,000 in income. So this was always just sort of a scenario to look based on this assumption. So without it being project specific, and again, this is the one you're gonna see the most changes to because we're gonna completely alter the way that we project agency fee income.
Which is probably more-
400,000 was, it'll
It'd
be
be
a
more
little more
appropriate.
accurate and
Would be
appropriate.
more appropriate.
This was always done in the past based on historical averages of what the IDA revenue was. So again, under this one, the big change obviously is in 2026. It would show a $280,000 decrease in cash, with the cash on hand being available at the end of the year of 907,000. This obviously would give us a couple more years of runway, so we'd have about 4 years of runway, and then, run into issues under this scenario. But again, this particular forecast is gonna change entirely by the time we next.
And we have the
meet.
same question around other operating
Yeah.
expenditures here, too.
Yeah, so we'll make that change on both.
Okay.
Next item of business is to review and recommend approval of the proposed 2025 IDA budget to the IDA board. So you have two different they're complementary to each other, but two different versions of the budget in front of you. One that is a highly itemized and one that is a little bit higher level in terms of categories. And I'm gonna go through the higher level one, but we'll note anything that is causing significant fluctuation. And this is also gonna change based on discussions we had this morning. We have always historically done a cash flow budget. We are going to continue to do a cash flow budget, but we are also going to do a GAAP budget, which is generally accepted accounting principles. So that budget will be directly in line with the way that our P&L statements are done. So it will budget depreciation, and it will basically not include the capital expenses.
Any balance sheet items, per se.
Right.
Exactly. So you will see both on the same page ultimately, but right now just keep in mind that this is purely cash coming in and going out. We can talk a little bit about the 2024 forecast as well, actually. Let's start there. So agency fees, we are forecasting, and this is a combination of the actual agency fees and the application fees that we receive. We are forecasting $195,303 by the end of this year. At this point, some portion of that has come in. At $24,634. So the projects that are still outstanding, these are projects that have been approved, final resolutions by the IDA board. Gregory Development, which, if I'm remembering correctly, I think I have signed closing documents.
Yeah, we did get that agency
So
fee.
we did get that agency fee, but it happened after June. So that was $6,800. And then we have the two Lodi solar projects that were approved by the board. Those have maybe a little bit more uncertainty. It seems like we are gonna close on those before the end of the year, but as we know, solar is somewhat questionable. These are smaller projects, so they're not as questionable as like Trelina, which we did not account for in any of the forecasting. $54,000 in Seneca County support, which was already paid to the IDA. $100,000 in rent and lease income. That is Del Lago. That's the last year. So 2024 is the last year we get that payment. And they have paid it. That was in July. RLF income, so this is interest paid on loans and interest earned on accounts. But it's not funds that can be used for other IDA purposes. We show it because it can be used, obviously, to grow the loan fund and for administrative purposes for the RLF. IDA interest income, $59,673. That is up significantly from what we had initially budgeted at the beginning of the year, mostly because interest rates have stayed very high and our CDs have generated greater returns than we initially anticipated. So total operating revenue estimated by the end of this year is at $418,280. Payroll is going to be up a little bit from what was initially budgeted. That's in large part we do our budget before we have the governance committee meet and do staff evaluations and potential raises and increases for the following year. So again, that's going to have the same impact on benefits. Professional fees and services, we are going to be in this year under budget. So we had budgeted $101,000. We're actually going to come in closer to $65,000. We did not end up engaging an engineering firm for any services. It just wasn't needed. We're going to be not engaging any PR firms this year for anything. We are going to be under on our business retention program, which is very common. We always cap it at $15,000. That's what the contract is maxed out at, but Jim Armstrong isn't billing us for $15,000 worth of time on the road. So that'll be cut about in half. And then the other significant savings is legal costs. We may not even end up having the $5,000 that we've estimated as potential legal costs. Most of those are all passed through to business entities. It's just if we sort of have inquiries that are outside of a particular project scope. So that's where the savings is primarily coming in our forecast on the professional fees and services side. On the general office side, we're gonna be a little bit under budget for the year. Copying and printing, furniture and equipment, you know, we didn't have many expenses on those ends this year, even despite the move. There were a couple of other things that were up, but overall, pretty on target there. Administrative and technical, again, we're gonna come in a little bit under budget. Mostly on the legal notices and advertising. Projects have been slow, which is not a positive thing, but it does mean that we're spending less money on public hearing notices. So that's something at least. And then insurance, that was our insurance through the county, which is gonna be under budget. We are gonna have a significant insurance increase next year, and we'll talk about that when we get to what's being proposed. And the only other thing is travel. We've been doing a little less travel this year than what we had initially planned. A lot of the conferences that we would typically go to are being held a bit further away and are not worth the expense of the trip and the time. One item that's obviously gone up from what we initially anticipated is repairs and maintenance. So we had initially budgeted this year $10,540. We are anticipating to spend closer to $17,000. That is obviously in large part due to moving into this building here. So our estimated total operating cost by the end of this year, $477,000. We are not likely by the end of this year to spend the $50,000 that we had earmarked as site development. That was initially put in the budget as a potential payment to do inventory of sites in the county for future development. So we're not likely to do that. We do have some added costs under other expenses associated with this building. So the $9,000 that you see, the actual through June was the cost of design. The $35,300 forecasted includes that plus the additional for the construction documents that are being drawn up. So bringing our forecasted loss for the year overall to $94,458. Again, cash loss, I should specify,
Cash
because
basis
the architecture work is a balance sheet item, it's a fixed asset. Moving on to unless there are any questions about the forecast, we'll move on to what's being proposed for the 2025 budget. So as of right now, we do not have a significant amount of agency fees that we are anticipating. We will be updating this number. Again, it's gonna reflect the way that we're gonna be forecasting agency fees. What we had always historically done is what you're seeing, which is if we had an application for a project, or if we had an existing payment that was already contracted to come in, it was accounted for. So what you're seeing is $20,000 from Scepter, which is an annual payment that's made for the duration of their pilot. And then $4,000 from Finger Lakes Rail. Their pilot is set to expire, but because they've come to us for a new one, we're estimating that if the board approves that, it would be a very similar structure, although we are hopeful that we would be able to negotiate maybe a higher agency fee. So that's a total of 24. We did put in a request to the county this year for $100,000 in support. We have had conversations with the supervisors, and it does not seem evident that that $100,000 is gonna come through, so we are budgeting for 54, which is our historic level of support from them. Nothing much of interest in RLF income, IDA interest income. We are gonna be budgeting less than what we've received this year, mostly because the Fed is dropping interest rates, so we anticipate that to impact when we go to renew our CDs in the beginning of next year. So that as of right now, this budget, again, it'll be updated before it goes to the IDA board with the new forecasting. It's estimating $135,596 in operating revenue. On the operating expense side, really the big changes are coming in professional fees and services. We're essentially proposing to keep everything the same as what we've always historically budgeted at. Again, when it comes time to look at actuals, it will likely be under budget, especially if we don't use those engineering services and some of the other items. The big change that I want to highlight for everybody, there's two of them, insurance being one. So now that we're not in the county building anymore, they do not want us on their insurance. which means that we are going out on our own for general liability, directors and officers, and commercial property. We are estimating 15,000 as of right now in the budget. We've just received very recently some actual proposals from the agent, and it seems like the cost is gonna be a bit less than that, but it's still a considerable jump from what we were paying when we were going through the county for insurance.
And why are we not able to go through the county for insurance? What's changed?
Our address.
Just the address.
Property location. Mhm.
I don't really know how to answer that question in all honesty. It's a matter of, I had I'm trying to think of what her title is, but basically the director of risk management, I think, is the one that handles the insurance and everything through the county. Basically came to me and said, now that you guys are out, the chairman wants you to move to your own insurance coverage.
How does it cite, well, okay, I understand. We'll make a phone call to that. I mean,
It is gonna be an added expense. I would say the one positive thing is it's always been very difficult to get a real sense of what our insurance coverage is when we've been with the county, as far as like having copies of the policy if we need it. It's never been easy to get that kind of information. And I think part of it is the way they bill insurance, if I'm remembering my conversation with her correctly. So they always billed it based on, I think, the square footage or something that you took up in the county building was how they allocated it, or was some combination of that and what your total payroll was.
Okay.
So that's a little bit different. If you want to still reach out to them, you obviously certainly can. We would have had an insurance increase anyway, because when we added this building, we had not historically been insuring this building when Excelis was here. We should have been, quite honestly. We did add it to the insurance when they vacated, but because this was vacant at the time, it was much cheaper than
Right.
what it is now occupied. So we would have seen an increase anyway, but we're estimating essentially a $10,000 bump there. The other significant increase is the repairs and maintenance line. So that we had historically budgeted $10,540. That's more than doubled as a result of having this building. So just to give you an idea on the breakdown for this one, if anybody's curious, $600 in special district taxes, $2,400 in water sewer bills, $7,000 in NYSEG bills, $6,500 for mowing, landscaping, plowing of the facility. That's probably an overestimate, especially if we have another mild winter.
But that also includes Deer Run as well.
It does include Deer Run as well, that particular number, nothing else. Fire inspections, just over 1,000, office cleaning, about 3,400, trash disposal, 1,200, and then we did add a miscellaneous line of 5,000. That's, if there are additional repairs or things that need to be addressed in the building, for a total of 27,287. The only other significant item that is changing between 2025 and 2024 is under other expense. You'll see an added 167,883 for office renovations. That's the estimate that we have based on the design schemes that were done by the architects. And again, that number is showing up purely for a cash flow basis. It would not be on the P&L because it'd be a fixed asset that'll show on our balance sheet.
It's a balance sheet adjustment.
We will show two different budget columns. One will be the cash flow budget and one will be the GAAP budget, and you will not see the office renovation on the GAAP budget.
What would be the operating consequences of postponing the renovation until we had a commitment from a tenant?
Honestly, we could manage. We could manage without it. We have, and if we needed to, we would continue to manage.
It might make sense to do that in light of just the lack of sort of visibility on, again, I would prefer we nail down the tenant and then decide what we really need.
And I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, the one thing about the way things are right now is it works because we have a whole building. So when we have phone calls or meetings that are running consecutively, we typically will step out and come into one of these other rooms. If we were to start sharing with a tenant who also, assuming they take that space, which right now is not ready for a tenant, we have things in there we have to address, which can be done without renovation necessarily. But assuming we get that cleared out, that is also an open space, which means a tenant would have the same sort of issue that we have right now, which is no privacy for meetings. So then the only issue becomes potentially competing with each other for the few spaces that are closed off when we have to take phone calls or meetings or things. It's completely feasible. Like I said, I'm not.
So I would suggest we somehow make a note that that number really is contingent upon finding a suitable, at a suitable rate.
Okay. So, I guess as a
In
follow-up
the
question.
gap budget, it wouldn't be shown
It
anyway.
wouldn't show it.
It wouldn't show anyway. So I guess the follow-up question is,
Yeah.
do we get rid of it? Or do we keep it? And if we keep it and it's contingent on a tenant, does that mean then we need to add into the budget a tenant? Which
Yeah.
adds an income, but it also adds an expense because there's gonna be more cleaning, potentially more utilities. How would everybody like us to reflect?
I would take it out for that reason. That you can't hold that.
Take it
in.
out of the budget?
Yeah. You
Okay.
can't hold that expense in if you're not gonna have any offsetting revenue there too.
Okay. So we will remove it from the budget.
So that line item goes away.
Yeah.
That line item is gonna go away.
I mean, we've done.
Well, it
we-
stays,
we-
the line item
right.
stays from the architecture
From that
standpoint.
standpoint, because that has been spent.
I mean, we've done the work, we know roughly what the order of magnitude of those, of that renovation is right now, and, it's good to know. But I think, like, under the circumstances, what we're looking at is probably not the right time to commit to spending that money next year.
Yeah, without a tenant and without
Without
any true known, larger
Mhm.
income streams.
Yeah,
Okay, so we will remove that. That begs the question of, we did put the 50,000 for site development into 2025 as a potential. Should we also remove that?
I would remove that. I mean, if this was money designed or earmarked to identify potential industrial park sites, was that the objective? I think
Take it out.
Yeah,
Okay. All right, they're out. We will, again, we'll make that update with the other ones I mentioned before we get to the IDA board meeting. I know it's not ideal timing because you all are essentially recommending something that you're not seeing the final
But the concept,
corrected version of, but based on the concepts, and we can try to get a corrected version to you all before it goes out in the board packet as well. So those are the highlights in terms of the budget. Are there other comments or questions or recommendations?
just noting that there'll be an additional column
Mm-hmm.
with the revised version. That column will be used also for presentation purposes on the P&L statement monthly. And it's a gap budget, not a cash flow budget.
one thing that I think, because we anticipate yet additional or new members, having some backward-looking exhibit that shows where our agency fees have come from in the past to, I mean, we're sort of assuming that these things come in mainly because they have in the past, but it would be helpful to know, at least I would find it useful to know, how much of it was windfall agency fees, which are, I would put the solar projects into the windfall agency fee category, and how many and how much of them were sort of business expansion from sort of the employer base of the county.
We can do that. How many years would you like to look back?
3 years?
Now, I'd like to look
Probably
back
more than
further.
that.
I'd like to see 10. I mean, again, it's very hard not having the sort of the gut instinct of how the revenue streams have flowed here. Yes, there will be things coming in, but not really very much this year. And
Okay.
I think we need to look a little harder at those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky part is, remember, all the years, we've always run out of money in 4 to 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, every single estimate, 4 to 5 years, we run out of money, and we haven't, but then,
It's been consistent that you always show that it's not gonna, you're gonna run out of money in 4 to 5 years. The thing is, are we in different times? Is that really gonna maybe happen now? And I would say, you know, you got expenses that you're covering before that you didn't, you got taxes, you got other expenses that you're paying here, insurance that you didn't have before. And frankly, the economy's not all that great, and it may be a year tougher for some businesses to decide they're gonna do an expansion. So, you know, this may be one of your tougher years.
So we will go through and
Yeah,
see
and
what we can pull for the past
Yeah.
10 years. We'll
And-
look
and
at,
maybe break them down by industry sector. We don't necessarily need to know each and every entity, but if we look forward, again,
Yeah.
I'm paranoid.
we'll see
about
what
this.
level of detail we can pull based on our records. Personally, I would like to, if we can pull and assign by project, I would like to do that just to see.
Good,
And we'll do not just agency fees, but our other income as well. I mean, obviously, we've had like the Del Lago income, which shows up as rent and lease now, so we want to make sure that we're going to account for all of those. And then likely what we'll do is the itemized revenue with whatever the aggregate expense was for the year. I don't think we'll do an itemized look at that, but you can also maybe see how that has trended just in general,
Okay.
if that would be helpful.
That would
So,
be
you know,
Again,
we'll,
we've got some new faces, and there will be more.
yep, we can work on that. Any other questions in regards to the proposed budget? Hearing none, motion to recommend approval of the budget as has been described and revised.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, Kelly?
Mr. Guthrie,
Yes.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Brusso,
yes.
motion carried.
We have no other business at this point in time unless any of the committee members have any additional items they wanted to address. Can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
I,
Okay.
Let's, want to skip and do the funding corp quickly?
Can we do that?
We can do that. All right, Bob, this one's you.
Okay. All right, the first item is the approval of the audit committee minutes of March 7th, 2024. Yes, well, a motion to approve
Yeah.
those minutes.
I'll move, motion to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Reviewed and recommended approval and engagement letter for the audit of 2024 for the funding corp. Document was included from the auditor. And the fee,
Fee is $27.50 for the audit.
yep,
And 700 for, related to Paris.
with that
So-
being said, I would accept the motion to approve the engagement letter for 2024.
So moved.
Is there a second? I guess I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Item number 3 is approval of the 2025 budget.
So this one is a lot simpler than the IDA. We have some forecasted interest for the funding corp for 2024. And our expenses are actually forecasted to be a little bit under what we had initially budgeted, mostly because we haven't had any legal costs through the funding corp. So as of 2024, we're likely to have a $2,456 loss. For 2025, we're proposing $1,572 in interest. These are new items. I should point out, we did put some of the funding corp funds into a CD, which is what the interest estimates are coming from, just so everybody's aware. Not enough, unfortunately, to cover the estimated expenses. The audit in total would be $3,450, and again, we put in another $1,000 for legal costs just in case. And then $500 in special fees and payments and $500 in miscellaneous. For total expenses of $5,450, that's obviously offset by the interest revenue for a net income of negative $3,878.
Are there any questions regarding the proposed budget for 2025? If not, I would accept the motion to approve.
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. I believe that concludes the business for the funding corp. I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Yeah, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, Steve.
I'll save the best for last. Now we're into the Economic Development Corporation portion of the audit committee meetings. Everyone received a copy of the minutes from our previous March 7th meeting. Any changes or modifications? Hearing none, we have a motion to approve.
So made.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Next item is the engagement letter, which is essentially the same, identical to the previous two that we already discussed. And here, the regular audit is for $61.75. Tax returns for $13.50 for a total of $75.25. Sarah, anything to add
No.
to the engagement letter?
I mean, the only thing I would say when I saw this earlier was, is that the best they could do for I mean, this is like really nothing there, right?
There's really nothing that, you're right. And Kelly and I were actually talking about this the other day, because we're like, the funding corp one is expensive. I mean, it's not compared to the others, but really the EDC audit nowadays is more in line, or should be more in line with the funding corp in terms of there's virtually no activity. We could probably go back to them and push on that. I know historically it was always a little more because of the cemetery, but that's been off the books now for a couple of years, so we can go back to them and maybe talk about and request an update and see if they can give us a better number there for the EDC. If that's what the committee would like us to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
We will go back to them for that then. Is the committee comfortable if we get a revised number with that updated engagement letter going then directly to the full EDC board?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be-
We can do that.
So therefore, what, need a motion to recommend approval of the engagement letter, subject to further negotiations on the actual fee.
So moved.
Second.
Second? Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kime?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Next is review of the EDC long-term forecast.
So this one, we probably need to have a similar discussion to what we just did with the IDA audit committee in terms of, we had accounted for the potential office renovation with two scenarios. One being that the EDC has applied for grant funding to help support the build out. And so under that scenario, the EDC would fund the project. The other scenario was if that grant didn't come through, the EDC does not have the funds to just take on the whole project, and that's why it had also been proposed in the IDA budget. That's obviously been removed from the IDA. I know we're not quite to the budget yet, but we did show it in the forecast here under the EDC scenario where we, you know, the 83,942, that would be the amount that we applied for in the grant. The 171 that you see in the other operating expenditures is the renovation cost plus some of our other minor items. With this scenario, it essentially renovation drains the EDC of its funds, even with the grant, to the point where by 2027 we're
Out of money.
out of money. How does the committee feel about this situation? I mean, we have not had a significant amount of economic activity coming out of the EDC. We've talked before about potentially disbanding it. So under the scenario where you essentially drain the funds, it's a way of kind of giving that organization, I guess, sort of a last hurrah of here, let's do this, and then potentially close up shop. If we decide economically that we did not want to do that, you know, we could continue to sort of try to operate as cheaply as possible and explore other opportunities, try to find new revenue streams or new activity by this agency. It may be difficult to find a role for it, considering the county is very invested right now in creating an LDC, and we don't want to duplicate services.
Yeah, before I would have said, no, don't do that, but in as much as the county's gonna start up the same thing, pretty much, what are we doing with this?
Sort of, I mean, they are basically, it's the same agency, there's nothing
Yeah.
that this one could do that that one can't do, and vice versa. I mean, there's not to say that there couldn't be room for multiple LDCs, but we've already struggled as it is to sort of find purpose for this one outside of a couple of odd projects. I mean, we've certainly had ideas, but a lot of our ideas bank on us being able to really utilize the space, be able to bring in other agencies, and we just don't have the revenue between the IDA and the EDC to
So
do what we're hoping.
this grant, state grant for, you know, the renovations, et cetera, when is this, or when would we know whether we have it or not?
Based on what I've been able to find, the anticipated award announcements would be near the end of this year. It was a CFA application, so they sometimes announce in the fall, but it'd probably be closer to December that we would hear and possibly have a contract.
And does that money have to go through here? I mean, does this have to be the only?
IDA was not eligible, so it was a not-for-profit
Yeah.
capital grant.
Okay,
I mean, we could also just say we can't afford to do it, and we applied for the grant, but if we got it, we can turn it down. You know, that is an
Obviously.
option.
Yeah, so really the question becomes, with the EDC, you know, itself, if we did not receive the grant, well, everything would just stay as is, and then we would say, well, what do we do?
if you're not gonna do something with it, and the county's opening up the same thing, I mean, I would have hoped we could have done something with it and had it have a purpose, but if the county's gonna do that, and they were just basically waiting until we run it out of money, what are we doing?
And then if we did get the grant, do we, essentially, let's go
Yeah.
ahead and do the renovations, almost like zero out the account and
Yeah,
disband the E EDC.
I mean, my thought was very similar on the same line, but if we didn't get the grant this year, what's to say you couldn't apply for it next year under the same premise?
We could, I mean, assuming that
If
they
you're-
keep the program around and, you know, quite honestly, I don't know how strong of an application it is. It's a little bit tough to apply as the EDC for that project, given the discussion we're having of what activity has the EDC really done, and we're trying to argue in a grant application that this renovation is gonna like sort of be life-changing for economic development and our impact. I mean, it certainly would benefit the IDA to do it.
that you're saying.
But I don't know, I mean, we'd have to sort of see what the feedback is on our application. I'm not overly optimistic.
I mean, I would,
Something to wait and see.
yeah, I mean, I guess for now, I would probably say leave this
As it is.
in as is. If we do receive the grant, you know, would we go ahead? Probably more likely than not, we would go ahead. If we do not receive the grant, well, there goes the revenue, well, there goes the expense. And,
I mean, right now, we're just bleeding it out with the audit fees,
yeah,
essentially.
Yeah.
so essentially, yeah, we
Okay.
kick the can down another 3-4 months, and if we get the
If-
grant, proceed with the budget. If we
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah, I wouldn't
two
turn the
items
grant,
come
if you
out.
get the grant for that money, if we have to cut back what we do, I wouldn't turn the grant down. I'd get the money and I would utilize it. But if we don't this year, I don't see where it's gonna be any better or different next year. And at some point in time, you might as well pull the
Okay.
plug on it. So to me, I'd leave what you have here. If we don't, if we get the grant, great, bring it in, we'll have to decide how much are we really gonna spend and what are we gonna do with it. I wouldn't give
It's
it up.
unrestricted, right?
It would have to be used for the
For
capital
the,
project.
for the capital project,
Yeah.
but it's how much do we spend, what do we do? And also, I think it
If we
depends
scale
on,
back the project, it scales back the grant amount. So what we applied for this program was, it's a 50,
50/50.
I think it was 50/50 if I'm
Yeah.
remembering right. Yeah, I mean, the only other consideration for
Right.
the EDC is if we got a grant, we did the project, we nearly drained the EDC, the only thing we'd have to make sure is that there are no outstanding, like, reporting or other requirements or liabilities that we would need funds in
yeah,
order
I
to
also
support
question,
for a
if you
period
ended
of
up
time.
with that money, that part of the expense that you're gonna do, if you had money to put into the project, if you then could get a tenant to help come in and put some money into it, and you put this money into it, it may be able to fund it other than just pulling it out of here. If you came to me and said, hey, you can rent the space here, we got $83,000 to put towards it, are you able to put in X amount of money? You know, that may be an option. And work at doing that. If we end up not getting anybody interested and the grant doesn't come, then no use of sitting here
Yeah.
until we use it up.
And our I mean, this capital cost that's being proposed does not include any improvements or renovations to potential
Mhm.
tenant space. It's
Well, we
purely
might,
out there and in here. I mean, we could maybe change
I might, right, I was
things.
gonna say, to me, I would change what you're gonna do, based upon who you could get, if you could get somebody, and put that money with this money and try to, even somebody else being here, heat, things like that, more activity, I think there'd be a benefit to having the right tenant here and putting this money into that, even if it meant we had to change what we do. If none of that happens, then I would probably quit paying the accountants to tell us we did nothing.
Yeah,
Okay.
Agreed.
yeah, so at the end of the day,
Yeah.
you know, the EDC isn't, unless something changes dramatically elsewhere, the EDC is essentially, you know, dying and.
Yeah.
Do
The
you cut the
only-
cord quick, or do you?
The
yeah.
only other thing that I've been considering is we have our loan fund in the IDA that is undersubscribed and potentially in threat of having funds sequestered. I mean, we have not gotten any kind of notice, but, you know,
Mhm.
obviously we're above our allowable limit. The only reason that could be relevant to the EDC is if we were to apply to defederalize those funds, IDA is not statutorily allowed to grant or loan its own funds. It was grandfathered in with that program, and those
Mm.
funds are restricted to that use. But if we were gonna defederalize and use them, say we wanted to do a slightly different loan program, or we wanted to do a small grant, or whatever it is, that might have to be contracted with the EDC, which would then generate some activity here.
Mhm.
That's a very, very early stage idea and something that has
Yeah,
not really
yeah.
been explored in any way, but
Just a point of information, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm just kind of guessing at this, to close this fund, or this corporation, would probably cost you $3,000 or something in legal fees to just wrap it up? And then wouldn't it cost like another $7 if you wanted to open it back up again?
I mean, yeah, if we
Yeah.
needed to open another one, it would be more than,
I mean, that's
Closing
just
it
the
down.
audit fee.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So it would save you money just to close this one down, and if you needed another one, open it up again.
potentially. I mean, the part of the reason why we hadn't been too serious yet about shutting it down is because we would, the money that's in the bank, not that there is much, could not just go sort of wherever. I think it would have to go back to the county, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
With liquidation, with liquidation, it has to go back to the.
I believe so. I'd have to look
The
again.
132.
Yeah, I mean, by the end of this year, we're forecasted at 117, but yeah, I mean, that's not an insignificant amount, like,
No. But, you know, I was always hopeful that we would come up with some purpose for it and we would utilize it and
I
do
know.
something with it. You know, that it hasn't happened. And, you know, whether there's some way to push more doing it, but the loan fund itself, is there money that could come from that into this and you could do something with that?
potentially.
You
And
need
I
it-
mean, the real thought there is, if we were to do that, if we were to defederalize and then somehow put it into the EDC for programming, whether it's microloans or whatever, is there a way to have that be generating enough? Because the loan fund can be currently used, some of it for administrative things, you know, so if we could move a portion of it to the EDC, there is maybe the potential that it could at least run as a break even, maybe.
Well, I would say you've got not that many months to figure out,
I
can
know.
we do something
Sure,
with it or
yeah.
not? And if you can, then there's an argument to
Do.
do something with it. If not,
Then, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so we'll leave the long-term forecast for the EDC as it is.
Yeah.
We will push to get some real concrete options on the table before the end of this year.
and we have someone that is contracted with or hired to try to market this or not?
No.
Not yet. No. I mean, we're waiting, there are two potentially logical tenants that we have not gotten firm commitments from and have not pressed for firm commitments from. And I think one of the leading candidates is the county's LDC. That's the board, the county's LDC board candidates have been interviewed. The list of 7 preferred board candidates is being forwarded, I think, to the county's board of supervisors for the next meeting. If they're approved, that will sort of officially kick off that entity, and it will dawn on them that first order of business will be to hire an executive director and a staff person, and they're gonna ask where we're gonna put them. And already we've spoken to them about using
Yeah.
this space here. It's the only logical thing to do.
Yeah.
And so they've actually made some progress in getting the actual entity going.
Going.
Okay.
Okay.
So moving on from that to the actual budget, which will need to be voted on. it's basically the same document as the long-term forecast. So 2025, proposing 100 in interest income, obviously the 83,942 in potential grant funding. We've got professional fees at 10,525, which is auditor and CFO. 2,000 in legal costs, that's the one we typically don't spend because we don't have a need. Although if we're talking about disbanding or whatever, then that obviously would be some legal costs associated. Insurance, right now estimated at 3,500, which the EDC does carry its own directors and officers, but it does not have general liability insurance. So we have gotten some estimates on that. It's like $550, I think, a year. So we could be looking at a slight jump actually on the insurance if we decide to go that route. The EDC does not necessarily have a ton of liability anyway because we're not really doing anything. So I suppose it's sort of up to the discretion of the board of how everybody wants to proceed, if we should go about and pay for and adopt that policy, or if we want to sort of risk it without insurance.
How much was it?
If I'm remembering right, it was like $550
Yeah.
annually for a premium that was for the general liability. I don't know, so,
Yeah, I think if we're gonna try to do something with it, if we don't, then we wrap it up. But if we don't, I probably wouldn't get smart for $500 and have some liability you could end up with, something goes wrong. It isn't worth, and as directors, you have a liability to make sure you do those types of things. And if we ended up getting sued, had a problem, for $500, it's not worth it. Somebody sues you for $300,000, for $500, it's not worth taking the risk.
Yep.
yeah, so we will likely
Yeah.
get that signed and contracted, so it's
Yeah.
there. We're actually doing the same with the funding corp, which I forgot to mention, because that entity doesn't carry any insurance.
This is
Which is a
the
problem.
cost
So, anyway.
If you ended up renovating stuff here.
Yeah, it was like.
And then obviously other,
Okay.
the biggest item of note is the
Yeah,
actual
this part.
expense, related to the capital project, so.
Okay.
Projected net loss of 100,167.
If we do the project, if we find a project to do.
If we
Yeah.
decide to do the
Yeah.
renovation project. If
Yeah.
not, obviously, things are in much better shape. The agency could go another few years without any changes.
Mhm.
Obviously, we don't wanna keep doing that. We wanna come to some resolution one way or the other.
Yep.
Sounds good.
So, motion on to recommend approval of the EDC budget.
Yeah.
Just
Anything that you have with this, and you know you got it one part of it, I
Yeah.
would note why we've got that loss. And that's if we do a project, if you're spending money on something, on this one here, I would at least clarify what that is. Everybody listening to it now knows that, but 2 years from now, somebody may not, or a year from now, or 6 months.
Oh, yeah, adding the note for what.
Just
this
add a
is
note
for.
down here at the bottom of why that, how come
Because it
all of a
just
sudden we're
stands
spending
out.
$184,000? What is that for? Because here it's just under operating expense, it's really not an operating expense. I'm not even sure I wouldn't change the wording to have it a line down below, say, capital project or
We can do
something.
that. And one other item of note, because we were showing the capital expense on the EDC budget, we were gonna make the same update that we're gonna do to the IDA budget, where there's a cash flow budget and a GAAP budget.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for cash
It's
flow
easy to do.
purposes, the renovation expense would show up, but it would not show up on the GAAP
Yeah.
budget.
So therefore, I guess we need a motion to approve the proposed EDC budget with the miscellaneous notes and comments added in.
So made.
Second.
Kelly?
Mr. Brusso?
Yes.
Mr. Kine?
Yes.
Mr. Shipley?
Yes.
Motion carried.
And no other business for the EDC, so motion to adjourn.
Make it your turn.
So made.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.